Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Tonya Duncan Ellis has had her nose in a book since she started reading, and so it's no surprise she became a writer. She's the author of the best-selling Sophie Washington children's book series, a former journalist, and a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. She's also a member of the Authors Guild, Black Creators in Kidlit, and the Brown Shelf's Highlights Foundation-sponsored Amplify Black Stories Storyteller Cohort. She's a 2022 winner of Squibby's independently published book launch marketing grant, and in 2021 she won the Austin Squibby Cynthia Leitich Smith Writing Mentor Award. Tonya loves learning about other cultures and has travelled to 49 states and 20 countries. I have a lovely conversation with Tonya. She really is a determined woman, and I can see why her books have taken off and why they're doing so well. Not just because they are great stories and they have characters that aren't usually represented in the children's books she's found, but also because she believes in her books. She knows their value. She thinks they are good. She knows that they have something to tell kids and can help kids learn different ways of being in the world. And so because of that self-belief, because of that determination, the Sophie Washington series is going from strength to strength, and I really liked chatting with Tonya and finding out how she went about getting started with her series and how she is continuing to grow her books and her brand. All right, let's chat to Tonya. Well, Tonya, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to learning more about you and your writing. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Emma. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a writer and to getting published.
Yes, well, I am a Houston, Texas-based author. I started out as a journalist after college. So from the time I was a little girl, I wanted to write. I loved books, reading and writing. And I won a writing competition in 5th grade when I was 10 years old. And then I determined that I wanted to be a writer. And back then, I didn't think that I could write a book. That wasn't something that seemed like a career option. So my teachers encouraged me to look at journalism. I wrote an article that was published in my hometown newspaper in high school when I was about 14. And in college, I studied English literature. And I started working at a newspaper after college. I did internships each summer. And so I did that for a while. Then when I got married and had my children, I was home with them for a while and I did freelance writing in a magazine. But when I would read with them, I said, I've always wanted to write a book, and I would read little chapter books with them that are similar to the books I write now. And I said, these books don't have a lot of diversity in them. And I said, I could write something like this that would show the diversity of my community, because here in Houston, we're one of the most diverse states or cities in the United States. So it has a very diverse population. And I said, I could show the diversity of the community, the unique lifestyle, and make a fun, entertaining series for kids. So I just started writing the first book in my series, and I self-published the books. And so I started promoting them in my community, and they caught on, and I've sold over 7,000 books since then. Yes, since I
Congratulations. That's
started.
phenomenal.
Yeah, so I've just continued on with the series, and now I have a literary agent and am selling or working to sell some other manuscripts.
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to go down the self-publishing route?
I honestly, Emma, I did not know much about the steps it would take to traditional publication. And I kind of was just, this was kind of like a bucket list item I wanted to do. I wanted to write a book, and I just became obsessed with writing. I would write, and when we talk about time, because as a busy mother, I would write during the time when my kids were at practices or doing different free gaps of time I had during the day. And I didn't really investigate how to get it published. And I just said, well, I was only going to write 1 or 2 books. I said, well, I'll just publish this myself. I didn't even anticipate it taking off like it did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of just thought this was kind of like a bucket list thing I was doing. And then when it started becoming more successful, that's when I began promoting the books.
Oh, it's I love the fact that, and I think this is happening more and more, and you I think epitomize this really well, is that a lot of writers are starting off in the indie space for various different reasons, but their books take off, and then the traditional world kind of goes, oh look, there's somebody over there who's publishing, maybe we should take an interest. And I've come across a lot of writers recently who are sort of making that transition over from purely indie either to a hybrid or indeed even to one of the big 5. So it just shows the shifts in publishing that's happening.
Right, because actually Scholastic bought the rights to one of my books last year. It's a book, Sophie Washington Code 1. So it's a book in my series that has the kids learning about computer coding.
Right.
And they put it in a STEM program.
Oh, that's really good then. So I can, yeah, and I actually was speaking to somebody recently who writes middle grade STEM books, and it feels like it's such a, we're stepping into realizing that it's through stories that kids learn their best. Is that rather than being told, this is what you do, actually, here's a story about what other kids have done, and it's more inspirational that way, and they absorb the facts that way.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you what inspired the Sophie Washington series, but really I think you've sort of answered that you weren't seeing enough diversity in the books that you were reading to your kids. So the characters in the Sophie Washington series, are they based on your kids?
Yes, they actually are based on my kids. My daughter's name is Sophia, and I have 2 sons, and Sophie Washington in the books has a little one brother. So the son, her brother is kind of a combination of my 2 sons. And then many of the characters in the books are based on their friends and other children I've encountered through the years.
And how do they feel about being immortalized in this way?
Well, it is fictional. I mean, they're based on, for example, my daughter was bullied in school. So my book, The Snitch, talks about how the children deal with being bullied. There are similarities, but they still are fictionalized. So I don't just, mind their whole life where they're hiding like, oh no, mom's going to write about this. So, and then my kids actually read my books. Now they're older, so they don't, but especially in the beginning, and they would give me advice like, oh, you need more action here, or this is a little boring. So they kind of read them as bedtime stories and then give me feedback.
That's brilliant. You've got your ideal reader right there in the house with you, and you get that live feedback. I think we'd all love that, I think, for all of our books. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love to read, and I actually love middle grade books. So I got into it as well. I would read books with them and try to introduce them to some of my favorites from when I was a little girl. And I still today read middle grade books at least 2 or 3 a month just to keep up with what is popular.
Sort of keeping up with your
And I
genre.
advise that for any author, and even I'm writing picture books now, and I'll go get stacks of picture books from the library and just read them to study the craft and study what is going on and what's popular.
And so for those who do want to write middle grade books, because that's what you're writing or you're publishing at the moment, what are the sort of if anybody is listening wants to write a middle grade, what are some of the sort of technicalities they need to be aware of in terms of things like, does it need to have illustrations? What's the page number, or how many words on average does a middle grade book need?
Right. And typically middle grade books are from 20,000 to 40,000 words. And if you are traditionally publishing, you won't really have to worry about illustrations because the publisher will choose the illustrator for you. If you're self-publishing, I kind of lucked out with my illustrator because he's phenomenal, and he was referred to me by a friend who used him for something else. So, but there are different sites. One is called Reedsy that I highly recommend. It's spelled Reedsy, and it has vetted professionals from all areas of publishing, people who are freelancers working in traditional publishing, so they can help you with cover design, graphics, editing, and all those things you might need. But technically, the middle grade, also the characters are between the ages of maybe 8 to 12, so they're not in that teen space. So with the topics, you're not going to have any swearing or more mature topics you may not include in those storylines. Most of them have the ending kind of wraps up. It's kind of got a problem they're solving, and you're going to solve that and reach that by the end of the book.
Okay.
So they have that kind of plot structure, whereas a YA book or something may be kind of hanging more on a cliffhanger, or the ends aren't tied up as cleanly as you'd see in the middle grade.
So you want to make sure you've got a good solid ending that your reader is kind of walking away thinking, oh, good, all is okay with the world again.
Right, kind of like that sense of satisfaction at the end, and it's kind of explained and tied up those loose ends.
I was wondering that about also about the themes, and if there are any no-go areas, like, would body changes be something that you could consider in a middle grade?
And they do have, I haven't written about body changes too much, but those are found in middle grade books. For example, if you're familiar with that classic Judy Blume book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Some books now, they'll talk about menstruation. Of course, it's in there. Those are themes that can be covered in the middle grade space because that's happening to kids in those age groups. Most of the time, my books talk about fitting in. I talk about social media use, setting limits with video games, being truthful, hard work, and perseverance. So they're the common things that the kids are dealing with. Bullying is the big thing that's woven through many of the books.
Yeah. The social media one must be interesting. How do you sort of tackle that and around how kids behave around social media?
Well, in one of my books, Sophie Washington, My BFF, it's all about Sophie and her best friend having changes in their relationship as her friend Chloe is developing a little earlier than her. She and some of the other girls are more interested in boys. And in that book, they take a picture of Sophie, an unflattering picture, and put it on the internet. So it's kind of cyberbullying. And Chloe refuses to take it down. And there's poor little Sophie goes through a lot of ups and downs in that book. But I just kind of talk about that, or that's woven into the story. because that's the kind of thing that's going on with kids these days.
Yeah, it's really worrying. My eldest is 10, so she doesn't yet have a phone or anything, but I have to admit, I know it's part of the modern world, but I'm really reluctant for her to have a phone and for that part of social media to start opening up. I don't know how I'll cope with it.
And speaking of phones, one of my books has Sophie wanting a phone because she's 11, and then she's one of the last of her classmates to get a phone, and she's begging for a phone. Yeah, but that does open a Pandora's box once they're getting into those.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I need to read that one actually and find out how Sophie Washington's mum handles the social media on the phone.
Yeah.
Advice. So you've talked about it briefly, but I'd love to just delve in a little bit further. So about finding your publisher. So you self-published, and the book started taking off. So did you take it upon yourself to organize things like school visits, or to go, so I don't know if you went to local bookshops and asked them to stock your book? How did you go about building your brand and your name?
Yeah, that was a huge process, because what I did, I think what helped me initially is I got local press. And since I live in Houston, is the 4th largest city in the United States, so it's a pretty big market. So I pitched newspapers, and then I got coverage. So that helped me. Another thing I did was get Kirkus reviews. So those are reviewed. They have a Kirkus Indie imprint, which is, it's pretty costly, but it was worth it for me because I wanted to do the school visits, and they really respect a good Kirkus review. If you get a favorable review, the librarians. Oh, okay. So what I did initially too, I forgot about this. When I wrote my first book, my children's school librarian was my very first reader. And so I loved her. I always have volunteered in libraries, and I would be volunteering there and helping her all the time. And she encouraged me with the first book I wrote. And so she gave me my first school visit. So I would encourage people to get those relationships with librarians. So she gave me that first visit, and then I had her testimonial. So I used that when I went to other schools to get in. And I started out offering free visits at some private schools and smaller schools in my area. And then they gave me good recommendations. So it just grew from there. So I did approach them myself. And what I would do now, I email schools. And now my my books are approved in my school system. So I had to apply for that to get vendor status. And so, because some schools told me they wouldn't allow me because I was not a vendor. So then I went through that process with them. And now that I've done so many, I've put them on my website. I have recommendations from other librarians. So it's just grown.
So can I ask, what is the vendor status? What's that?
Now, I don't know, since you're in Scotland, I don't know if they have that, but here in the US, you may need to be an approved vendor at some schools. All schools don't do this, but some public schools require you to be an approved vendor for them to purchase your books.
So does that mean that your book has been vetted by somebody and deemed acceptable for schools?
Yes, I had to go through this, fill out all these forms and send in my books and wait on an approval process to be approved by my school district. Okay. And then in some, the librarians did something for me behind the scenes that wanted me to come in. So I'm not sure, but I had to do that in my school's district to get approved. So now I can go in any of the schools.
Okay. Oh, so that's a real gate opener then, getting that vendor status.
Right. That was a big gate opener for me. So that helped.
Mm-hmm. And do you enjoy that? So presumably you do, if you've taken such steps to go and do the school visits. Do you enjoy mixing with your readers and speaking to them?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of being a children's author, because I love kids. I love interacting with them, and just seeing their faces and seeing them excited about reading is really what it's all about for me, because I have always been a voracious reader. I love to read, and I want to encourage children to read and love books because it opens up the world to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of my favorite, because during the pandemic, I was sad because I had gotten approved as a vendor right before the pandemic. And then the visits I had locally were just virtual.
Okay.
And I didn't get to get in with the kids. So that is one of the highlights of my job.
Yeah. And I imagine that too, that's where you would get a lot of ideas for your next book in the series.
Yes, actually, I have a Q&A time at the end, and I'll ask them about books they like to read and what they like to see and things like that. So I do get ideas from that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. At the top of our conversation together, you mentioned that Houston is a very diverse place, and one of the things that prompted you to write the series was because you weren't seeing maybe your kids reflected in the books that they were reading. So when you go to schools and there are kids there from minority groups, is it and I asked this question because I watched an interview with Marjorie Blackman, who's a British children's author, and when she would go to schools, say inner city schools where there's a lot of Black kids, and the example she gave me that really stood out was young Black children saying to her, "But who really wrote the book, miss? Who really wrote it?" And she'd be like, "No, I wrote it." And the children might say, "Well, who helped you with it?" Because they hadn't seen that other Black writers or that they believe that they could do this. So right. I found that very moving. And I think she did too. Have you had similar experiences whereby you're really being a role model for future writers?
And I haven't had any children say that to me. One thing that recently happened, though, was a young girl who had dyslexia. She was a little Black girl who had dyslexia. She got so excited when I came, and then her mother emailed me asking me for help because she had written something and she felt like she could write a book. And I was participating in an event called Black Children's Book Week that just started this year. And they had a competition for a pitch competition for youth. And so I encouraged her to get involved in it, and she won $400. Yeah, so, and her mother was so happy. So, but I think even myself, I know I never thought that I could be an author. I never had an author visit as a child. That wasn't anything I ever thought was possible. So I'm sure the kids ask questions about how they could make a living, if they could make money and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it's inspired them, and no one's really said that to me.
Uh-huh. Oh, I'm sure you have. Yeah, even if they've not been able to articulate it, I'm sure a lot of the kids have been inspired. And to feel that they not feel, I don't know, maybe some kids think they might be uncool if they admit that they like writing stories and reading books. So you'll give this new kudos to it, and they'll see it differently, I'm sure. Yeah, it's great. I wanted to ask you too about time management, because at one point you were working, you've got your young kids, and now you're writing full time, I guess. But when you first started out in those early days, how did you find balancing work life, family life, social life, and then your writing life?
Right. And my writing life really takes up a lot of my time and days. And some things I do when I go to events, I would include my kids with me to have them with me helping and participating, because I would do a lot of things on the weekend. But with the writing itself, what I did was block off time, and I'm a morning person. So I would get up early, like 5 or 6 in the morning, which may not sound fun, but I would block off an hour every day. Like when I'm working on a book project, I still do this because that's the way I can get my work done without any interruptions. And especially when my kids were younger and I had all these activities with them, I would block that time off. So that way, no matter what happened in the day, I know that I got my writing in. So that's what I'd recommend. If you're a morning person or evening or whatever, just block off that hour. And then for me, as I mentioned earlier, I would spend a lot of time sitting in cars waiting when my kids were in activities and things. So I would use that time to write. When I was there, I'd just sit and write. I'd be in my car half the time when they were growing up. So those were times that I would write. But I set a schedule for myself where I block off that time. Usually early in the morning is best for me. I'm fresher, and I turn my phone off. My husband gets mad because he says, you don't answer. But then that's the way I can really get work done on my books.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard for other people who see us writing and they think, oh, we're just scribbling a few things. But actually setting those boundaries and, like with your husband, being able to say to him, I'm working. I'm not answering my
Right.
phone because I'm working. I know it looks like I'm sitting at the kitchen table, but I'm actually working. And so it's really important, I think, for writers, particularly new writers who aren't yet making an income with their books, they have to be the strong ones and set those boundaries and say, no, darling, this is my writing time. Please respect that.
Right. And you really have to do that. And I would literally lock myself up in a room. And that's why I would get up early, because they weren't up and no one would be bothering me. And my family has been supportive. But as you said, my husband did see this as, oh, you're doing your little whatever. And now he sees, he's happy that it's been successful. Mm-hmm. But you have to make that time for yourself. And even if your book isn't a huge commercial success, if this is your dream and what you want to do, you can make that time for yourself to do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if it's your dream, absolutely. I love it. I jumped on ahead actually because I didn't ask you about then how your agent and the publisher found you. So your book took off, you were doing all the engagements, you had the librarians behind you, which is half the battle. What happened next?
Well, really, I found my agent myself. What happened is that, as you see, I have 12 books and I have my 13th book coming out this summer. And this is a lot of work. It's a lot of time. And I had gotten my book in a Barnes and Noble. And I was so happy. I made an Instagram reel. Yay, rah, rah, rah. And one of my friends said, well, oh, what other Barnes and Noble? And I'm like, this is only one Barnes and Noble. And it took so much effort to get it in that Barnes and Noble. And I said, I want my books everywhere. I don't just want them in one place. And it's because I am a publishing company. I'm not only an author, I am an editor. I do have editors I hire, but I'm doing all these different things. And so for me, it's becoming just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And I said, I need an agent. So I got a book. I'm a member of a group called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And they have something called The Book, and it lists all these agents. And a switch flipped in my head. And I said, I want an agent. Another thing, I'm going off on all these tangents, but I also won a writing competition. I was at a writer's conference, and one of my manuscripts was selected as the most promising manuscript, and they were going to give me a mentor and help. And the agent who selected my manuscript encouraged me to get an agent too. Oh. So this all happened last summer. So when that happened, and after the Barnes and Noble, I said, I want my books widely read. I don't want to do all this work. I want help. And so I sat down with the book. I pitched about 20 or 30 agents. So what you do to get an agent, you have to write a query letter to pitch them. So I identified agents who had authors on their roster who published books similar to what I write. And I just sent letters to 20 or 30 agents. And so you get a lot of rejection with that. But finally, my agent responded. She liked my manuscript. She believed in my work. And so now I'm working with her to get a traditional publishing deal.
Right, I see. Mm-hmm. Oh, well done you. I'm laughing because I love that you were saying to yourself, one Barnes and Noble is not enough. Yeah. I want all the Barnes and Nobles.
Right. That's what I said. Like at first I was so happy, like, yay, it's in here. I said, wait a minute. I want my book in all Barnes and Nobles. I believe in my work, and it should be in all the bookstores. And that's where it's going to be. So
yeah, and you need that determination, I think, don't you, to make that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, and you really have to have thick skin and determination in this industry, because there is a lot of rejection. Mm-hmm. Even after I have my agent, then I've had rejection. We send that manuscript on submission, and you're going to get rejection. It takes a long time, but if that's what you want to do, you have to stick to it.
Got to stick to it. Love it. So now that I've chatted to you, I suspect I know the answer to this, but one of the things I love about your Sophie Washington brand and business is the merchandise and the printables that you have available on the website. Is this something that your agent suggested, or is this something that you said, no, I'm gonna do this for my audience?
Well, I did that before I had my agent. And as a self-published author, I own the rights to all my illustrations because they were my concepts. So I wanted to make as much money off of them as possible. And I said, well, I have these images because all my books have black and white, about 20 black and white images each. And so I said, oh, I could make coloring books. So I actually made those myself because I had purchased the images from my illustrator. So I own them. And I was just trying to get as much money from the illustrations as possible. So I created those coloring books and I had him design the color cover for the coloring books. And then I said, well, one little girl wanted a Sophie Washington birthday party. So then, yeah, I was so happy. So we created the paper plates and napkins for the party for her, party supplies. And I made t-shirts, sweatshirts. So I just used those images that I had to create those.
That's a great idea. And if anybody listening has some images, or it has great characters that they can create images from, whether it be children's books or middle grade, or even sort of fantasy and sci-fi and things, if you've got the rights to that, which is just key to everything, isn't it, then presumably you can supplement that income or cover the costs of book covers, cover the cost of editors and all the other expense that comes with being a business. So kudos to you again. It's like you're making this happen. I love it. So we're coming towards the end of our time together, and it would be remiss of me not to ask you to tell us about your Sophie Washington series. Tell us what happens to Sophie, what kind of girl is she, and who are her friends?
Okay. Well, Sophie is a sweet and sassy girl from the suburbs of Houston. She's an 11-year-old girl who wants to be everyone's best friend. So in all the books, she gets into different scrapes, trying to fit in and trying to be the best friend of all the kids. So in the books, she learns lessons like standing up to bullies. She participates in a school spelling bee, so she learns about hard work and perseverance, how to be a good friend. So they're learning different lessons in each book, she and her diverse group of friends. And another unique thing about the books is since they're set in Texas, they have what I call a Texas twist. And Sophie and her friends go to the rodeo. They see alligators in their neighborhood, wild boar, Texas bluebonnets. They go to the beach because Galveston Beach is about a 40-minute drive from where I live and where Sophie lives. So they kind of show the unique flavor of life here in Houston. And even just last week, I was on a walk and saw an alligator out in a waterway. There's so many interesting things around here.
Well, as someone who comes from a country with no dangerous animals whatsoever, just the thoughts of seeing an alligator on the street terrifies me.
Yeah, my walk became a run after. Yeah.
And so what are you working on at the moment? Are you working on a new Sophie Washington, or you mentioned that you're looking to branch into children's books, you said?
Right. Well, I'm with my agent. I have written some picture books that are being considered by a major publishing company. So I'm in negotiation with that now. So I'm so excited. But I'm coming out with a new Sophie Washington book this summer where she has a seaside adventure. It's like a treasure hunt that she and her friends go on. They're visiting her grandmother in Corpus Christi, Texas at the beach. They see endangered sea turtles. They go on a World War II ship, and it's a fun adventure.
Oh, it sounds good fun. And when is that coming out?
That'll be out in this June.
Okay, not long to wait then. Fantastic.
Yes, I'm so excited. I'm working on all the finishing touches with that now.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm so excited for you. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your books?
They can find out about me on my website at TonyaDuncanEllis.com. That's TONYA, DuncanEllis.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Tonya Ellis Books and Twitter at Tonya D. Ellis.
Lovely. Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure to link to those in the show notes. Tonya, it's been lovely meeting you. Thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Well, thank you so much for having you on. I would love to go to Scotland one day, so maybe I'll look you up or give you a call.
Yes, please do. I'd love it for Sophie Washington to come to Scotland. Yeah.
Oh, that would be.
You could hunt for the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, no.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.